The terrible war between East and West was no more than 3 days old when, on the early hours of the 4th of January 1985, Royal Navy submarine HMS Odin detected an underwater threat off the northern coast of Norway. This threat turned out to be a submarine of the Soviet Union's Northern Fleet, attempting to reach the open waters of the North Atlantic, where she could engage in unrestricted submarine warfare. HMS Odin had been allocated this patrol zone specifically to stop such threats. And so, at 0400 hours on the 4th of January 1985, she engaged the enemy, firing her first shots of the war. Her Majesty's submarine Odin, pennant number Sierra 10, began her war at Her Majesty's naval base Clyde, otherwise known as Faslane, on the west coast of Scotland. HMS Odin was a diesel-electric submarine of the Royal Navy. The second boat of the Oberon class of diesel-electric submarine, she was laid down in 1959 and commissioned in 1962. Throughout the 60s, the Oberon class were considered to be long-range advanced vessels of the submarine service. However, by 1984, as tensions between the Soviet Union and the NATO alliance continued to mount to dangerous levels, HMS Odin was not a young boat anymore. Nevertheless, she was sent to Faslane to reinforce the Royal Navy's 3rd Submarine Squadron and prepare for war. From this base, and working with the US Navy assets based out of Hoddy Lock, just around the coast from Faslane, NATO assets could patrol the GI-UK gap, the vitally important stretch of sea between Greenland, Iceland and the United Kingdom, through which Soviet Union assets would have to traverse in order to strike at Allied shipping coming across the Atlantic from North America. And so, on the night of the 1st of January 1985, when Warsaw Pact forces struck into West Germany, orders were sent to the Royal Navy submarines based at Faslane to head to sea and begin their patrols. As per her orders, HMS Odin made way for a patrol box known as Blue 044, just northwest of the Norwegian island of Andøya. This region was part of a choke point between Northern Europe and the Arctic. This area gave NATO their first opportunity to stop the assets of the Soviet Union's Northern Fleet moving west towards the GI-UK gap and out into the Atlantic. And it was here that HMS Odin detected an underwater threat.
Con, dive at 550 feet, dive by.
As a matter of fact, HMS Odin had detected at this point as few as 4 contacts. In order to increase the efficiency of Odin's passive sonar sensors, the captain ordered all stop in the engines. Whilst concurrently, the sonarmen got to work trying to find out exactly what they had detected. 3 of the 4 contacts were quickly designated as merchantmen. However, their allegiance was as yet unknown, and Odin's captain would check later via the periscope. The 4th contact was almost certainly a submerged submarine. The sonarmen aboard HMS Odin believed it was a Whiskey-class submarine. This class was actually of a 1940s design, heavily influenced by the technologies of the German Type 21 U-boat. HMS Odin was a far superior war machine compared to this boat. But before Odin was to engage, our captain first wanted to be as certain as possible as to what else they might be up against. However, a Danish trawler was heading straight for Odin. The noise of the ship's engines was making things difficult for Odin's sonarmen. Odin's captain had no wish to release weapons with these merchantmen in such close proximity. The risk that one of these vessels could be struck by a stray torpedo was very real, and as yet the Whiskey-class boat showed no signs of having detected Odin. However, As the crew of Odin settled in for the long wait for the vessels to pass, the whiskey continued to close the distance to dangerous levels, until at last Odin's captain was convinced that to delay any longer would be too dangerous for his crew, and so he ordered torpedo and tube 1 fired towards the enemy. Hearing the launch from the torpedo, the whiskey-class boat immediately began to ping with its active sonar, detecting Odin, and immediately returned fire with a torpedo of her own. Odin's captain ordered the boat to dive and turn to port, and the whiskey deployed a noisemaker just as Odin's torpedo went active. Not 10 seconds later, the Soviet torpedo began to home in on Odin. The captain ordered their own noisemaker released, whilst also ordering both engines to maximum revs. Fortunately, the noisemaker was successful in deterring the torpedo, but Odin continued to dive and pick up speed. However, the whiskey's efforts were not as successful.
Sonar lost contact. Sierra 3, last bearing.
Passing 400 feet.
The torpedo that HMS Odin had successfully dodged did not reacquire its target. Instead, it entered into a circular search pattern. Whilst HMS Odin moved on a easterly course, opening up the distance between herself and the torpedo. Having moved to a safe distance, HMS Odin's captain brought the boat up to periscope depth so that he could take a better look at what lay on the surface of the sea.
Sonar Master 1 is classified as merchant.
Having now visually confirmed that the three surface contacts were not of any threat to Odin, he decided to remain in the vicinity of the sunken whiskey, believing that there must be more than one Soviet sub out there. He wanted to find it and destroy it. And indeed, after a very long wait, a fifth submerged contact was detected by Odin's sonarman.
Sonar Sierra 5 is classified as submerged submarine.
Odin's sonarmen were certain that this was a Tango-class submarine. A diesel-electric, just like the Whiskey and the Oberon, but unlike the Whiskey class that had just been sunk, this boat was far newer, a 1970s design. It could prove to be quite a difficult adversary for HMS Odin to deal with. Just like with the Whiskey, Odin had been able to close this boat to knife-fighting range without being detected. Once again, Odin was able to fire first. However, almost immediately, just like in the case of the Whiskey, the Tango immediately returned fire and went active on its sonar. However, it did seem quite apparent that the Tango did not have an exact fix on Odin's position. She fired a spread of 3 torpedoes in Odin's general direction. Odin's captain held his nerve, keeping the boat at silent running. He took very little evasive action, continued on a steady course. Odin, at this present time, was sailing above the thermal layer. The Tango had fired from as deep as 550 feet. The thermal layer near the surface of the ocean helped to mask any noise emanating from HMS Odin. Furthermore, all 3 of the Soviet torpedoes were set to go active at a far greater distance than that between HMS Odin and the Tango, and so as a consequence, all 3 passed harmlessly far below HMS Odin's hull. By contrast, Odin's torpedo, still connected to HMS Odin by its wire, was able to be manually guided towards its target by Odin's weapons operator. As long as the torpedo's wire did not break, there was very little, including throwing out noisemakers, that the Tango could do to avoid being hit by the incoming torpedo.
Sonar lost contact. Sierra 5, last bearing 349. Contact breaking up.
And so within a mere 90 minutes of having detected the first underwater contact, HMS Odin had fired 2 torpedoes and destroyed 2 enemy submarines. Odin's captain's earlier fear that one of the civilian ships might become a victim of a stray torpedo proved to be justified.
Bearing 1.
Some 12 minutes after the sinking of the Tango, a dull explosion was heard, which turned out to be one of the 3 torpedoes that the Tango had shot at Odin, striking the Danish trawler that had earlier passed over Odin's hull. The ship quickly took on water and rapidly began to sink. HMS Odin's captain, however, had other things to worry about. Odin's underwater battle with the Whiskey and the Tango had not gone unheard. As HMS Odin continued her patrol, the sound of an active sonar ping, followed by the transient launch of a torpedo, was heard. This torpedo launch did seem, however, to be not only quite premature, but something of a desperate gambit.
Sonar lost contact.
Sonar contact was, however, quickly lost with the target, and the torpedo that had apparently been fired at Odin was not detected either. Its position and general direction of travel remained a mystery. Of course, not knowing where the enemy torpedo might be, Odin's captain had ordered the boat to dive and to pick up speed. Over the course of the next 20 minutes, Odin's captain wanted to coat a distance to the contact that had fired at them. HMS Odin was taken south and then west in a box-like course.
Come right to 291.
After a long, passive search, nothing was found. But not wishing to depart with an enemy submarine in the vicinity, Odin's captain decided to take a greater risk, bringing the boat up near to the surface and beginning an active sonar search. The enemy retaliated in kind, and looks of bemused apprehension was shared among the crew when the sonarman revealed that their contact was none other than a Kilo-class diesel-electric submarine. If the Tango had been more than a match for HMS Odin, then this Kilo was certainly more than a match. The Kilo class was the successor to the Tango class of Soviet submarine. These were about as modern as they got. However, HMS Odin had luckily managed to work its way around behind the Kilo class and remained in the Kilo's baffles. This in turn had allowed HMS Odin to fire a single torpedo in the direction of the Kilo undetected. Once again, the torpedo's guiding wires had fortunately remained intact on launch. This had once again allowed Odin's weapons operator to control the torpedo manually and therefore ignore any countermeasures deployed by the enemy submarine in an attempt to deter the torpedo. In essence, attacked from her blind spot, and with very little room to maneuver, the Kilo's fate was sealed.
Sonar lost contact. Sierra 6, last bearing 353. Contact breaking up.
And so, only 3 days into the war, having fought her first action, HMS Odin had fired 3 torpedoes, scoring 3 hits, a miraculous 100% success rate, against truly overwhelming odds, considering 2 of the enemy submarines were far more advanced in design than HMS Odin. An inside running joke among HMS Odin's crew began to emerge. The deity after which their boat, their home, was named, must surely be watching over them. But the war was only 3 days old. How long would their luck last?